Since the 1950s, Japanese industry has grown at a rapid pace. They'd perfected mass production of the transistor, and the just-in-time production process churned out masses of increasingly perfect cars. Tokyo got skyscrapers with more and more neon lights shouting out the message, progress, progress, progress. This was all driven by companies such as Honda, Sony, Toshiba, Suzuki, Subaru, NEC, Yamaha, Mitsubishi, Isuzu, Panasonic, Hitachi, Toyota, Toshiba, Mazda, Sharp, and of course, Nissan. After decades of progress, and at the time that they were going to make their next step forward with the luxury Infiniti brand, Nissan's Figaro was, in a sense, a next evolution in car design, in progress, but at the same time it was an exercise in looking back, of taking stock of just how far Nissan had come. It was also a conscious effort by its designers to push against progress with something more gentle and organic. But the Figaro didn't come out of a vacuum. It was the culmination of several years of new design thinking. So how popular was the organic Figaro in its native Japan, and how has it found a new home on the other side of the planet? This is the Nissan Figaro story. Nissan had gone from Japanese sales to global exports in a very short space of time, and it was the 1970s that saw the largest growth. They had a wide range of cars that competed at every level, but one area they were lacking was a small hatchback that had become popular in Europe. They were a great second car with space for four and tons of practicality. It also appealed in Japan with its narrow city roads and tight parking spots, and there were domestic cars that had already entered this market, such as the Honda City. Nissan had the Cherry, but it wasn't the small practical car that customers wanted. So in 1982, Nissan launched the March. Now, if you live in Europe, you know exactly what this car was called over there because it became so ubiquitous, the Micra. Nissan produced 5 generations over more than 40 years, with production ending in 2023. For many, it was their first car, or the car in which they learnt to drive. But before the first Micra launched, Nissan's head of development asked the design lead if they could make some other body shapes to help boost sales. With Japan focusing on the latest cutting-edge technology, the team decided to take a different tack, to focus on naturalness, comfort and gentleness, the polar opposites of cars like the Toyota AE86 or the Mazda RX-7. Not only did the styling team look to a completely new design, they looked at different ways to go about it. There was what they called Plan A, which was what they were already doing, in-house designs. Plan B1 was to collaborate with external creative people. Plan B2 was a variation of Plan B1, and Plan C was to outsource styling to European designers, something that Nissan would do in the 1990s. Plan B1 led to the first of these new designs, designed by Nissan stylist Yoshiro Kabata and external stylist Naoki Sakai, a stylist from the fashion industry with no proclaimed interest in cars. In fact, he couldn't drive. But this was precisely the out-of-box thinking that Nissan wanted. Plan B1 led to a car that was named the Nissan B1. This might look like a hatchback, but the B1 was a rounded-off notchback. That is, it had a boot, but it looked like it should be a hatchback, and that's the official big car definition of a notchback. Nissan, of course, called the car a coupe just to be difficult. The B1 came with a hardtop or an electronically folding canvas roof, and the rear lights were an interesting design that looked like they were the influence for the 1995 Fiat Brava. Nissan expected maybe 5,000 sales with production capped at 10,000, but demand took Nissan completely by surprise. The company had to implement a lottery to choose who would receive one. Such was the demand, B1 fans who missed out were buying the car on the open market for more than double the sticker price. With all this popularity, Nissan were of course going to make a follow-up, actually 2 follow-ups. The first was the POW, styled by the same team as the B1. If the B1 had dabbled with retro styling, the POW went all in. It had more than a passing resemblance to the Fiat 500 Gardiniera, both on the outside with its round headlights and exterior door hinges, and the new retro-styled minimalist interior. Once again, there was the option of a canvas roof, and again, it might look like the POW was a hatchback, but it was a split tailgate. The flap-up side windows were influenced by the Citroën 2CV, and the side strakes evoked woody cars of the past. But rather than putting the power in 1950s inspired scenes, for some unknown reason Nissan went with a prehistoric hellscape with pterodactyls circling overhead, and what monstrous creature was going to hatch from that giant egg? Nissan's questionable marketing decisions couldn't prevent customers from loving the car though. This time the plan was to open order books for 3 months, then produce as many as were ordered during that time. It produced an amazing 51,000 orders, of which 31,000 turned into final deliveries. So was this a start of a new way of making cars? Nissan's styling department certainly hoped so, and there was another retro-inspired vehicle that launched the same year as the Power. The Small Cargo, or S-Cargo, get it, was a snail-like van clearly inspired by the early Citroën 2CV fourgonette, a van that was also nicknamed the Snail. If you look carefully, you could see the playful snail logos on the wheel caps. Once more, it had a canvas roof in case you needed to transport a baby giraffe to the zoo. Inside, it was all plastic utility with a Citroën-esque one-spoke steering wheel. There was seating for 4 with a bench seat up front and a small sitting area behind, along with a pretty large boot for such a small vehicle. It was still based on the first generation Micra, but instead of the 1-litre engine used on previous cars, the S-Cargo used a 1.5-litre from the Nissan Cherry. And given the wheelbase was different and it was a van, it's a fair bet that the rear suspension was also beefier. The B1, POW and S-Cargo had been designed by Nissan's Technical Vehicle Design Department, which was colloquially known as the Pike Vehicle Development Department, Pike because of its sharp cutting-edge designs. So these cars would become known as Pike cars. The quirky S-Cargo wasn't as popular as previous models though, it didn't sell out in its allotted time. Overall, around 10,600 were produced. Despite this, some felt that this limited run of cars was a new direction for the car industry. Maybe mass production had reached its zenith and this type of boutique manufacturing would become more popular. Only time would tell. For the next car, the team had been thinking of a 3-box saloon, but with their penchant for canvas roofs, the saloon became a convertible. Work began in 1988, this time with a different Nissan stylist, Shoji Takahashi, who would work with outsider Naoki Sakai, who'd styled the previous cars. By 1988, there were 10 quarter-scale mock-ups that were soon whittled down to 2. The winning design that continued the 1950s retro theme got turned into this full-scale clay. The car wasn't a full open top, the sides were fixed with just a canvas roof. The car was launched as the Nissan Figaro at the 1989 Tokyo Motor Show with the tagline "Back to the Future." The canvas roof had evolved into a full top panel that could fold into the boot. The public were once again wowed by this new retro open top, but again, being difficult, Nissan referred to it as a coupe, like they had the notchback B1. Some said that the shape harkened back to the 1935 Datsun Roadster, but there were lots of 1950s styling touches, such as lots of chrome and a two-tone exterior. The name Figaro was apparently taken from the Mozart opera The Marriage of Figaro and not the Galileo Figaro Magnifico from Bohemian Rhapsody, or indeed the Brotherhood of Man's #1 song from 1978. You can't unsee that. If the POW had a retro-inspired interior, the Figaro was nostalgia on steroids. Nissan had outdone themselves with Pike leather seats and headrests that stowed away so that they could look like 1950s seats, although it wasn't that practical as seats with whiplash protection are generally preferred. The Bakelite-style buttons, toggle switches and white dials with black lettering again evoked cars of the past. Those toggle switches had actually been phased out on cars in the West in the late 1960s as a safety hazard, but it seems that they were still okay in Japan in the 1990s. The styling team said that they were going for something that looked like a small Daimler, and there's definitely something of a Daimler Majestic about the Figaro. But despite the traditional design, there were still modern conveniences like a radio cassette and automatic transmission. And it wasn't all 1950s. All around the car there were 1930s Art Deco style flower bud shapes. It was on the steering wheel, the door handles and the electric window switches. If the demand for the B1 and POW was massive, it was nothing compared to the Figaro. Again, Nissan reverted to a lottery system to decide who could get one. The waiting list for the first 8,000 cars was 210,000 customers, although some of these orders may have been for financial gain given previous cars had traded hands for much more than the asking price. 3/4 of the buyers were male and over 40 years old. They craved cars from their youth like the Hillman Minx, which had been produced in the 1950s in Japan and badged as an Isuzu. During development, the Figaro's weight became a concern. Without a roof, the chassis needed strengthening, which added weight. Thermoplastic panels and chrome-looking plastic bumpers certainly helped, but the car was still a whopping 175 kilos or 386 pounds heavier than the bare-bones Micra. That's not something a wimpy 1-litre engine took too kindly to, and I know from experience. I drove a 1-litre Nissan Micra from Scotland to the middle of France, loaded down with 4 people and luggage. Overtaking on A-roads took quite a lot of planning. So Nissan used a 1-litre turbocharged engine, taking the power from 51 horsepower to a whopping 75 horsepower. With a 3-speed automatic making things slower, it still managed 60 miles an hour in 12.2 seconds. For a car so loved, it was perhaps appropriate that the Figaro officially debuted on Valentine's Day 1991. The car had changed a little since the concept. The main change was the inclusion of 2 boots, a top one to store the soft top and a lower one to store the spare tyre, and not much else. As Johnny Smith said about his wife's Figaro,
"The weird thing about the Figaro is it's basically got 2 boots, and they're both rubbish."
While the Figaro was officially a 4-seater, only the tiniest of kids could sit there, so instead of trying to store things in either of the boots, it was probably better just to use the back seat. In keeping with the 50s design, the chrome and 2-tone paintwork remained. The team added white and silver hubcaps that made the Figaro look like it had period-correct but very tiny white-walled tyres. On the front and back were small Figaro badges using the same Art Deco flower bud design on the inside. The Nissan logo was almost nowhere to be seen. Customers could order their Figaro in 4 colours that denoted each season: emerald green for spring, pale aqua for summer, topaz mist for autumn, and lapis grey for winter. The most popular was the blue winter colour, with very few going for autumnal brown. Inside, most of the original design was carried over, including those toggle switches. The entertainment system got a very modern boost with the addition of a CD player. Tradition could be enjoyed with the latest beats, but also with a lot of skips, as this was one of the first in-car CD players and it wasn't well dampened to take on a potholed road. At launch, Nissan said that they'd only make 20,000 cars. Given the factory could only produce a small amount every week, this would take them a year or 2 to fulfill, and again, Nissan used its lottery system to pick the lucky owners. The Figaro would, we were told, allow these lucky owners to enjoy a delicate feeling of stylish elegance in everyday life, and the car intended to satisfy a zestful desire for a good time. That's a lot of marketing speak to live up to, but when customers got to drive the Figaro, they were more than happy. But don't just take their word for it. Here's a story of a very happy American owner.
Hi, I'm Alec from the YouTube channel Technology Connections, and I have had this Nissan Figaro for about 5 years now. I don't remember when I first ran across the Figaro, but the moment I did, it lodged in my brain as something unique and special. I don't think there's ever been another retro-inspired car that isn't just retro-inspired, but looks old. Everything about this car, from the upholstery to the switchgear to the gauges to the chrome trim, just looks like something from the 60s, maybe late 50s. Nissan really did an amazing job hiding what this car is. And unless you're looking in very specific places, you don't even know it's a Nissan. And that's what I love about this car. It's just a pattern interrupt in every conceivable way. One of my favorite things about driving it in the United States is being right-hand drive. Everyone who sees it and doesn't know it's a Figaro makes assumptions about the car, and then they'll ask me, what is that? What year is it? And I get to say, it's a Nissan from the 90s, which is just delightful. It tickles me to this day. The entire time I've had the car, after quite a lot of preventative maintenance by my friend Robert, it's been mechanically perfect. It starts up every time, other than the fact that its original battery died. I just replaced it. But it runs perfectly, it drives perfectly. It's just a car. And that's one of the best parts about it. It looks like it could be a fiddly old classic car, but it's not. It's a Japanese economy car from the early 90s, and it's got all the reliability that that entails. And of course, being a convertible, it's lovely to drive around in the warm months. It's actually great to drive in the winter too. The heater in this thing is amazing, but I don't drive it in the winter because I live near Chicago and the roads are gross. So it's actually got some rust I still need to take care of now, but it's mostly cosmetic. So for now, I just enjoy it in the warm weather. And as far as driving, it's not that special. It's got plenty of power. It's not fast, but other than the turbo lag, which is significant, it will get out of its own way just fine. It's not fantastic on the highway with its 3-speed automatic. I don't like taking it on the interstate unless I absolutely have to. For the most part, I just putter around town. But it is buzzy and kind of like a contraption in ways that no other car I've driven is. I don't know if that's unique to the Figaro or just the drivetrain out of the Micra, but that does give it some extra fun as far as just day-to-day driving. The one thing I don't like about the Figaro, but I knew this would be the case going into it, is that it has absolutely no cargo room to speak of. While it does have a trunk, it's almost impossible to use. And so basically, you're limited to the back seats, which themselves are also funny. I don't know how anybody could be back there if they have legs. And then the front passenger seat if you don't have a passenger. So really, daily driving the Figaro is really difficult. It's barely any more practical than a motorcycle as far as bringing stuff around. But, you know, I sometimes take it to work with me, and I do love taking it on leisure drives because it's just a lot of fun. One of my favorite features of this car is on the dashboard. Lots of people mentioned the warning lights this car has, and I think that's understandable, they're really great, but I don't see a lot of people mention the turn signal indicators. I just think this is delightful. It's really subtle, it's barely an arrow, and it looks like a piece of decoration, but they are functionally your turn signal indicators, and I just love that. Every time I see it, I think that's amazing.
If you want a bit of angst and torment to go with your Figaro, there was The Figaro Story, a feature film that featured the Figaro in Paris, Tokyo and New York. This was less Hollywood action film and more European art house production, so if that's your sort of thing and you like the Figaro, then this was your sort of thing. If not, then may I recommend a film franchise you might not be aware of called The Fast and the Furious. I'm not sure you'll see it include a Nissan Figaro in a head-to-head drift-off though. Production of the Figaro ended in 1992 after over 20,000 cars had been produced. The Figaro was the last Pike car, but fashion stylist turned car designer Naoki Sakai created one more Nissan, the 1994 Nissan Racine. This was what we now call a compact crossover, and it was different to his previous cars in that it was based on the larger Nissan Sunny. The interior didn't have the design flourishes of the Figaro, but if you like the idea of lugging a TV in and out of your car every day, then this was the car for you. While the Pike cars were limited editions, the Racine was a regular production car and it was on sale in Japan for 6 years. Car companies looked at the success of the Figaro, B1, Escargot and Pau and saw the potential to create their own retro-themed cars. This led to cars like the new Beetle, the Mini and the PT Cruiser. There was also the Toyota Will cars that were designed with help from Naoki Sakai, but these cars never captured the public's imagination like his Pike cars had done. And amusingly, the whole thing came full circle when Fiat reworked the 500, a car that had inspired the Pau. Nissan didn't go back to the retro style of the Figaro, but they would push design boundaries with cars like the Nissan Cube in the late 1990s, again using the Micra platform. Another Japanese manufacturer decided to take the 1950s theme and run with it. The Mitsuoka Vute appeared in 1993, again using the Micra platform, styled to look like a Jaguar Mark II. It got even more Jaguar-y with the second generation model in 2005. It's still on sale, and the latest version that launched in 2023 is based on the Toyota Yaris. It doesn't make economic sense to hold on to cars in Japan. Maintenance and taxes mean there's a steady stream of cars that head out to countries that drive on the left, like New Zealand. So as the Figaro got older, there was an incentive to offload them, and Japanese Figaro owners discovered a ready market. The UK was quickly falling in love with a faux European retro car with modern, reliable mechanical bits. A trickle of imports turned into a flood as thousands of cars were soon being driven on British roads. When Japanese men fell in love with the car, it's estimated that 70% of British Figaro owners are women. It helps that both countries drive on the left, so the steering wheel doesn't need to move, but that hasn't stopped some particularly adventurous people from swapping the steering wheel to the other side of the car. It also helps that there's a ready supply of old Micras that can be broken up for old running gear and engines to keep Figaros on the road. But you better like radio too, as Japanese FM frequencies go from 76 to just 90 MHz. Thankfully, it can be upgraded for a reasonable fee with DAB Plus and Bluetooth, so no more skipping CDs. When the Figaro launched, Nissan were proud to say that those thermoplastic panels could be recycled. 30 years later, Figaro owners are trying to delay that date as long as possible. 1991 was still a time of Japanese optimism. Back to the Future Part 2, released in 1989, envisioned a world in 2015 that was dominated by everything Japanese. Such was the thinking that Japan would take over the world. But the 1990s would bring frostier economic times, and Nissan wanted to spend its money on luxury car projects like Infiniti. They were soon fighting for their very survival, being rescued by Renault. So in a way, the Figaro is doubly nostalgic for a 1950s when Japan was bristling with optimism for the future, and for the 1980s when Nissan and Japan were arguably at their greatest. Today, many cars look alike, so maybe a car maker could once more try Nissan's boutique pipe car idea, maybe create a Kickstarter to take a concept into production. That's effectively what Jaguar did with the XJ220 sports car. The deposits they took on the back of the concept were ploughed into producing the production model. But would a car like the Figaro be profitable today? In 1991 it was certainly popular, but it sold for 1.87 million yen. That sounds a lot, but in 2024 it's somewhere between £11,000 and £21,000, depending upon if you're using Japanese or UK inflation. But no matter whether you take the low or the high value there's not a lot of wiggle room in that price to make a profit on a low volume car with custom panels and interior that will need a whole series of crash tests and certification before it can go on sale. You may be able to increase the volume to more than 20,000 cars, but in a car industry with tight margins, it's still going to be hard to make the economics work, and it may well be that Nissan didn't make any money on its pipe cars in the 1980s. New automated production lines can produce many different types of car at once, so maybe a low volume version could be slipped in and this could reduce the production cost. And don't underestimate the value of the publicity that this could create to make a car company stand out. It certainly did for Nissan in Japan in the 20th century, and it's doing the same in the UK in the 21st century. If we see a return to boutique cars, maybe we'll get more classic cars like the Figaro. It's a car that still puts a smile on people's faces. It was a classic car then, and it is now. A big thanks to Alex from Technology Connections for sharing his perspective on this fascinating little car.
If for some reason you're not yet subscribed to me, idiot, go ahead and do it. Duh, jeez.
If you've ever wondered if you can synchronize indicators over multiple cars, then wonder no more, because he's made a video about just that on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.